The ghosts that haunted my life. Every summer, my family traveled across the country to visit our relatives in Minnesota. We had moved far away to Washington State when I was 5, and my parents were determined to keep our ties to our family strong. It was a 2-day road trip, and I grew tired of driving for hours and hours in the back seat of the 1972 Pontiac Catalina. But I also looked forward to seeing my cousins and investigating their 100-year-old farm. We explored every part of their farm. We climbed into the old red barn to play tag in the hayloft. We pried open the doors of several old railroad boxcars used as storage containers. They were filled with rusted items, cans, and old furniture stored away and forgotten. We climbed trees, played kick the can, and rode bikes up and down the old farm roads. Sometimes we braved their dark and damp basement. I was dared to go to the middle of the room, turn off the lights, and count to 100 before running back up the steps. With a scream, I ran up the steep steps to the safety of the lighted hallway within the first few moments. Most of the things we did were part of our yearly routine. I loved it. I never wanted to divert from these adventures every time I stayed. The visit was always memorable. It made me feel like I still belonged to the farm life, even though I had moved 1,000 miles away. It was comfortable, and I looked forward to reliving these fond memories every summer. We did this every year until I turned 9. That year, my dad hurt his back at work, and he couldn't travel. When I finally came back to Minnesota in the summer, I had turned 12. Things were different now. I was a preteen, and the things we had done as kids were now not as cool. Instead of exploring the farm, I wanted to watch the black and white TV, listen to Billy Joel records, and talk sports. Things had changed. I had changed. I was bored. That's when my cousin told me about a forgotten graveyard he had discovered. Of course, I was going to see it. We would set out in the morning, hike across the Minnesota landscape, and reach the graveyard by mid-afternoon. We would then be able to return home before dark. We got up before anyone else, made sandwiches, and headed out. We traveled through cornfields, quarries, and wooded fields. We ate our sandwiches by a small lake. There are 10,000 lakes in Minnesota, many without names. We finished our lunches and headed on. The graveyard was hidden under a humongous rose bush. I carefully entered the canopy and saw the first tombstone. It was dated in the 1800s. I soon saw the second and third tombstone. Everyone buried had the same last name. This was a family graveyard. Farmers from many years ago had sanctified by burying their kin for many years. It was now forgotten and overgrown. My cousin pointed to an area I hadn't yet explored. I saw 7 small white tombstones with lambs above the inscription. They were children who had died from the same disease, like smallpox or yellow fever. I was saddened as I imagined their pain the parents must have felt burying all their children. I felt embarrassed to have disturbed their peaceful rest. With a sobering silence, we headed back to the farm. We retraced our steps through the woods, the quarry, and finally the cornfields. Everything looked different in the shadows of the setting sun. I was getting a little worried that we wouldn't make it home before dark. I was so excited to see the farm in the distance. A thunderstorm was approaching as we walked into the kitchen. At supper, I answered questions about the hike with the bare minimum details. We ate and then headed up to his bedroom. Something was different. I felt it. I hadn't just gone on a hike. I had stepped into a sacred place. I didn't was to talk about it. I just wanted to listen to music and go to bed. I woke up to the sound of moaning. Dark storms always roll through Minnesota in the summer, as cold air masses chase humid air with thunder and lightning. But this didn't sound like a storm. I looked out the window of the darkened bedroom. The wind blew through the farmyard and objects were noisily moving back and forth. Then the lightning flickered above the ground and revealed the landscape for a split second. In that flash of light, we could see something. I was convinced I could see children darting back and forth in the grass. I woke up my cousin and ran back to the window. The lightning flickered again. He saw it, too. There were children dashing from place to place, moving towards the house. I didn't believe what I was seeing. I wanted to run out of the room, but I couldn't move. It was obviously our imagination, but why were we both seeing it? If we ran to get help from our parents, they would only point out that we had been to a graveyard, and it was now playing tricks with our minds. We waited until the lightning and thunder moved on before getting back in bed. The moaning died away with the storm. Cool air was now coming into the room, and we drifted off to sleep with the lights on. I woke up in the dark. Either the power had gone out, or our parents had turned the lights off while we were sleeping. I didn't move. I wasn't going to check the light switch. The moaning had definitely stopped. That was good. I was suddenly overwhelmed with the feeling of sadness. I don't know why. All those children dying. The parents must have been devastated. I suddenly became aware of movement in room. It couldn't be my cousin. He was sleeping in the bed next to me. Hearing the sound of footsteps running back and forth across the floor made my blood turn to ice. Was this a dream? The footsteps continued in the night. My cousin didn't wake up, so I was on my own. Once again, sadness was all I could feel. Even more than fear. I could only think of the pain of the children and the parents I had experienced in that graveyard. I did the only thing I could think of. I whispered, "I'm sorry." I don't know if I was sorry for their pain or for disturbing their rest in that abandoned cemetery. I said it over and over. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." I must have fallen back asleep. I woke up as the sun was coming through the window. I laid there until my cousin's mom called us down for breakfast. We went downstairs and were informed that the power had gone out in the night. The weirdest thing was when our parents asked if we had been running around upstairs in the night. They had heard footsteps.